Hey everyone, this is Brian here from Massey's Main Entertainment with a video follow up from one of our older series, and I'm really glad that we got an opportunity to go back to it. Series is called "Was This Album Really That Bad?" And today I'm joined by my good friend Sam St. John. Say hello, Sam.
Hey everybody.
So today we're covering Empire Burlesque. It's a Bob Dylan's 23rd album, known for its eclectic production and experimentation in contemporary sounds of the time. It was released in 1985, so I would have been a sophomore in high school during this time. Dylan collaborated with producer Arthur Baker, which I remember Arthur Baker from doing hip hop records and things like that, but predominantly like the Beat Street soundtrack. Artists of that fame, Africa Bambaataa, resulting in a very polished and synth heavy sound that marked a departure from his usual folk and rock roots. This stylistic choice divided both fans and critics, as some praised the updated sound while others missed Dylan's traditional aesthetics. From an accolade standpoint, upon its release, Empire Burlesque, obviously received a lot of mixed reviews. But some people did admire the fact that he was willing to try to evolve his sound, and others felt that he had lost some of his lyrical depth. Over time, however, this album has gained more appreciation with some retrospective noting in its place to his journey, especially during the 80s scene. Empire Burlesque is now often credited for showcasing Dylan's adaptability. So, from Dylan's perspective, he offered his reflections on the album. He said that the collaborative energy and the updated production he later suggested was maybe he was a tad bit off on, but maybe it didn't age well because of the 80s itself. He did recognize Empire Burlesque as part of his exploration into new territory, however. But and I thought it was kind of interesting anyway, a good album that we could choose here, Sam. So I know that we have somewhat similar taste in music. But we do kind of go in different directions for other things. So I'm really curious about how you feel about this album. As usual, I'll get the last word, but for now, the floor is yours, my man.
Yeah, thanks again. Yeah, for doing this. Because we've done a few different types of albums in this series, so this is cool to kind of get somebody that you're kind of newer in your musical life getting into like the deep stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So that's really cool. But just for anybody that doesn't know, I'm sure it's in the thumbnail, but this image alone screams, skating rink 1985.
Right.
And if we're basing this series solely on rear album covers, yes, this album is really that bad, just based on the cover of the back. But we're not basing it off the cover of Dylan, blinking at flash photography. And again, because I have it, why not go ahead and show Dylan looking very Hall and Oatesy in the
Yeah.
inside there. Yeah, this was an album when I was going through my whole uh, completion of Dylan's catalog. Obviously, I had to get it, and just ordered the CD. Didn't know any songs on the album when I first heard it, which was probably 4 years ago ish, something like that. I haven't known this album for that long. It had a couple of hits, so to speak. The Tight Connection to My Heart was kind of a radio friendly type song with the female backing vocalists. Emotionally Yours also kind of had some airplay as well. But really, yeah, everything else kind of falls into like that kind of almost like Dave Stewarty, your rhythmics kind of 80s vibe that, again, at the time was the hip, modern thing to do. But looking back, unfortunately, for some reason, the 80s seems to be that decade that gets the most flack for sounding dated, which again, obviously the argument is, at the time it wasn't dated. They didn't know that it was not going to, age well. So all I have to say, that's kind of what you're getting into with this album. You're getting the drum machines, you're getting super polished. You're not really hearing, for the most part, you're not really hearing, guitar harmonica Bob Dylan like you were. And what's so interesting is my second favorite Dylan album was the album just before this, which was Infidels from 1983, which is one of those albums that, a lot of people would, recommend to a new Dylan fan. I absolutely love that album. It's 1983, but it doesn't have that same kind of production that this album has. that the next couple of albums would have in Dylan's catalog, which again are often panned as being the bottom of the barrel. Those are the last Dylan albums you buy only if you want to complete your catalog with Bob Dylan. All that to say, I, again, like you, jumped into this kind of with an open mind. Again, I knew that I was getting back into the 80s stuff. And I remember when I was listening to it that there's a lot here that I do enjoy. Even as cheesy as Tight Connection to My Heart is, it is catchy. Again, it's kind of weird to hear Dylan go 80s pop, but it works for that particular time. I'm not going to go through every track, but a really strong point is the track "I'll Remember You," which is track 3 on side A.
Yeah.
I forget how much I enjoy that song. I hadn't heard that song in a while, and I know there was a lot of reappreciation for this album on the recent one of the more recent bootleg series called Springtime in New York, which covers kind of that mid 80s Bob Dylan era. Clean Cut Kid is okay. Side B has this ballad Emotionally Yours, which I think was it the OJs that covered that song. I think they had actually kind of a minor hit because they played it at the Bob Dylan's 30th anniversary at Madison Square Garden in 1992. They had a minor hit with Emotionally Yours. When the Night Comes Falling from the Sky, again, upbeat kind of, rockin' tune, 7+ minutes long, kind of a traditional Dylan length to a song. Something's Burning Baby is another, okay tune. But again, for me, and I'm sure like for a lot of people, the real gem is the last track, Dark Eyes, which is, you listen to it and you're thinking, is this some late 1960s, early 70s Dylan song that he pulled out of the archives? It's just Dylan, just guitar and harmonica. And it's not really polished because from what I understand, it was only written a few days before he recorded it. Like they needed that 10th song and he recorded this, and it's, a gorgeous ballad about, loneliness and, classic Dylan tropes. But, that song is the reason enough to buy this album. And you can buy this album at a record store for under $10, and it's worth it just for that tune.
It's at our local record shop. It's $4 for a vinyl.
Yeah, and you can probably buy it sealed with a hype, that kind of stuff. So all that to say, and I won't give away, essentially any kind of rating or anything yet, but it's a mid-tier Dylan out. It's not Blood on the Tracks. It's not Infidels. It's not even some of those early Dylan acoustic albums like Another Side. It's mid-range Bob Dylan, maybe a little bit below average. This is around the time that he's hanging out with the Heartbreakers. Right. So you have some of the Heartbreakers around here. Some familiar names in the studio. But
Van Zandt was on it. Yeah, right. Yeah. I mean,
Stevie Van Zandt, Sly and Robbie, the reggae duo. So again, kind of mid-range Bob Dylan album. I would be interested to go back through his catalog and see where I would rank this for all 40, 41 albums that he has. So those are kind of my generic takes on this after my re-evaluation.
Okay, good. Well, save your score for the end. There are a couple things I wanted to touch on real quick. I wasn't really optimistic about this album once you said you wanted to do it, because I said, yeah, I'll do it, and then I figured, well, I'll do some research, and like read, some information about the album. And I follow a couple of critics, and one of them I follow is Tom Hull. He's online. He's got his own webpage. His critic, he has an encyclopedia of albums he's listened to, probably like 40,000 or something. It's crazy. But of the entire 41 album catalog and all the bootlegs, this was the only album he didn't even bother to listen to because he had heard it was so bad.
Wow.
So I was going in and going, what did Sam get me into? And honestly, as a 16-year-old, in the high school, I definitely was not listening to Bob Dylan at the time.
Yeah.
I mean, there U2 and Peter Gabriel and Prince and, all those things. That was at the forefront of music there. And if you weren't making music like that, you were in serious trouble. You just didn't have that. So this I've only started listening to this album since you've asked me to do it. I've
Mm,
listened to it 3 times. I listened to it when you first said that to do it, revisited it in the car because I like listening to it in that fashion, and then I re-listened to it again today, so I have kind of a fresh perspective. And honestly, I mean, the first time I listened to it, I only liked Dark Eyes. That was
mm,
the only track I added to the best of Bob Dylan playlist that I had initially.
okay.
But on these subsequent listens, I did add Tight Connection, Trust Yourself, and Emotionally Yours. I added those other tracks. So that's 4 tracks that I added to his list because I'm like, it really wasn't that bad. Is it a super album by him? Is it in the tier of Blonde on Blonde or any? No way. There's no way.
Yeah.
I mean, and I don't know where I would rank it because I've only honestly listened to 28 of his albums of the
Hmm.
41. I haven't listened to his entire catalog yet. So,
No.
but I got to tell you that I did like, to me, the Tight Connection song, I like that reggae quality. It had a little bit of a reggae quality to
Mhm.
it, that little beat. Um, the backing vocals were great. I'll remember you. I did like the airy structure of the song, and he had like an echo effect with his
Mhm.
voice a little bit. You could hear that slight echo, like they were double tracking just a little bit off on purpose to create that echo effect. That's an '80s thing that happened
Yeah.
all the time, right? Um, yeah, Trust Yourself. Me, I liked it a lot because it seemed like it had the right combo of catchiness, and his crushing lyrics started to come out in that song a little bit more. Emotionally Yours, you already touched upon, one of the better tunes on there. And I didn't mind, pretty much the rest of the tracks I didn't mind. It's just that Dark Eyes kind of stuck out. If one thing for sure, Bob Dylan knows how to end an album. Yeah, I've not listened to a Bob Dylan album which the last track has not been really good.
Yeah.
He just knows how to do it. And I think because he was rushed and he didn't have time to mess around with it in the studio, that's what made that song the best, is that it wasn't as polished as those other songs, and you felt like, oh, Bob's still here, right? The
Yeah.
Bob that we
Yeah.
love is still here somewhere, and you're kind of willing to give a pass on it.
Yeah.
um I will say overall now that if I had to give it a rating, I'll go ahead and give mine first, I guess. I don't hate on this album at all now. I think that I'm willing to re-listen to it a couple more times just to kind of get a little bit of a feel, but I've got it somewhere between that 6.75 and 7 range. I think it's not up there in the high range, but it's not an awful album. It's
Yeah.
not. I think it may get a bum rap as being one of his worst, but I don't think so. I've listened to worse from him.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. And you was talking about how he ended an album. It's very similar to Planet Waves with how he ends with Wedding Song,
yeah,
where you can hear like the buttons clicking on the guitar kind of thing.
yes,
Um, yeah, I mean that's a solid, kind of rating for the album. I'd probably stick closer to the 6 range on
mm,
the album. Again, I don't have really any Bob Dylan albums that I can think of that are like a 3 or less, because there's at least always like a gem or two. And if you
mm,
take this as 10 tracks on this album, there are about 5 that are pretty good, and then the rest of them, none of them are like like I don't want to turn away from them. Like I'm not gonna throw up listening to them. So yeah, I'd say I'd throw a 6 in for me as well. Again, the ones that save it for me are Dark Eyes, I'll Remember You, Emotionally Yours, and then Clean Cut Kid for sure. And like I said, the other ones kind of hover, lower middle range for
yeah.
me, but they're not terrible.
No, absolutely not. And I think it's a testament to Dylan that he did come out of the '80s. I mean, that's one of the things everybody needs to understand. As people now, I've lived through multiple generations now of music and stuff. Is that when you were in the '80s, everybody in the '80s thought that sound was going to last forever. The hair bands thought that was going to last forever. And what happened was the early '90s rolled around and Nirvana flipped the music industry on its head, and all of those sounds went away for the most
Mhm.
part. They didn't come back until later on and get mixed in with different genres that had already existed. New gangster hip hop and jazz rap, and think all those things would just replace all of that stuff. But when I was in the '80s, we thought that sound was going to live forever.
Yeah.
But we're kids,
Yeah.
and the very fact that Dylan came out on the other side and later puts out great albums like Love and Theft and Time Out of Mind and stuff just shows you that he just had to survive, and he did.
Yeah.
And like you, I like Infidels. I think Infidels is a really underrated album by him. But I like that and Slow Train Coming. I know Slow Train Coming gets a little bit of slack, but I think it's a good, solid album. But I may be in the minority there. But kudos to him for coming out the other side of the '80s, because that is an accomplishment for artists, especially artists that started out in the early '60s.
Definitely, yeah. I mean, again, with some of those guys, Springsteen did the same thing. Kind of, again, they're always compared with one another, but the '80s, kind of got Bruce a little bit, and McCartney. I mean, all those guys that were the icons of the early '70s, late '60s, early '70s. The ones that didn't make it, fell hard, and I mean, it took Dylan a long time to get back to the top, because he finished the '80s with "Oh Mercy" and then went back down in the early '90s again.
Yeah, and then had to come back up a Time Out of Mind, and later on, and then in the early 2010s is before he started making consistently good records again for a few.
Yeah,
but thanks again, Sam, for doing this. I mean, and anytime you got another album you want to check out, I'm willing to do this series anytime.
Definitely.
It's a lot of fun to do. And I know that what I like about it is I know that you'll be honest and objective whenever we pick an album, and I think that's all we can ask of any music listener. I recommend everybody at least check this album out. It's not as awful as everybody has claimed it is. At least check it out. Empire Burlesque, 1985, Bob Dylan. And until our next video, you guys take care out there. All right. Bye-bye.